The opinions expressed in the following are those of its participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and the Six Talk Podcast Network. Also, the following contains mature material and mild language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
This is the Anime Roundtable Canada, presented by Anime North. You can contact us via email animeroundtable@gmail.com, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Anime Roundtable, and on the web, animeroundtable.com. Well, this is a hell of a way to start episode 83.
It's still going to be an episode, Mike? I don't know.
Well, we kind of have to force it. It's been a few months. Well, officially, we taped episode 82 as part of Anime North. That was at the end of May. It's been 3 months since we've done an official episode. We've taped a few other things. And well, really not much, just 2 space heater chats. And none of them featured you, James.
That is true.
Now, well, the thing is, and as I said, this is a hell of a way to start because we tried to plan this over the last couple days, but we also knew things would be up in the air. We all had our other, we all had our lives to live over the last little while. But basically, last minute, Mo had to bail. He came on briefly, actually, here in our little StreamYard studio, and has to see to some personal business. Evan's out right now, seeing to some personal business. Amy, seeing to some personal business. So that just leaves me and you, James.
I guess it's just been a busy summer, as they say, right?
Well, yeah, it has been, because this is the first time we've had you on in 3.5 some odd months. How the hell are you doing?
All right. I guess I was just a hard person to track down, as they say, but we did happen to see each other at, funny enough, an anime event, not this weekend, but last weekend.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a bit later on.
And you might as well go in chronological order almost, right?
Well, yeah, it's been a long summer, so
I can give you some thoughts of what I've seen as I've been trudging along.
Let's go with that until Kevin said he'll join us a bit later, and all three of us did go to Anime Toronto. That's the event we're talking about.
That used to be IFF Toronto and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of stories there. We'll swap our stories about having gone there. Although I know James and Kevin were there a lot more than I was over that weekend. But
actually, it was funny too when we were there on the last day. I thought they were doing a Guns N' Roses concert at Bud Stage, but I guess they were doing it nearby.
It was Rogers.
It must have been Rogers.
Yeah, I looked it up. It was Rogers Center, and
it made me think. So, is GNR still together under the name for, their lead singer, Axl Rose, and whoever he got together? Or, because I always wonder about that, because remember, they broke up so many times, right?
Yeah, and I don't think Slash is associated with the current
I don't think he
Guns N' Roses now, and I think then I figure that's a messy story. I'd have to look that one up.
Let's just say there was a lot of Guns N' Roses being played on the Sunday afternoon of that anime event. I'm sure that would have been something for the guests to see from Japan. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
The sea of humanity and Guns N' Roses paraphernalia, and just everyone they had buskers out there. It's like anything from the sound system was playing the classics. So
that's about right. So how do I put this? as I came down on the Sunday, and and you'll hear this in the report, how I didn't see all of it. Yeah, I kept seeing a lot of Guns N' Roses t-shirts on the subways. So we'll talk about that
Actually,
a bit
it
later.
was funny because we say that, and I think it was definitely the Saturday. It was the Saturday, and I was coming in on the GO train from the suburbs. And when I went on, there was a Bocce the Rock cosplayer that was getting on to the same stop I was, which was something you rarely see, but it was something kind of made you think. It's like,
Hmm. I mean, I guess you would have expected it during FanExpo weekend, the weekend before, actually.
very much true. But it was interesting to see that they still have people going down for this event. But we'll talk about it later. And there was actually some interesting things I saw as we went from the June, July, and August and stuff like that, and some
Okay.
things that relate to things we've obviously talked about before.
Okay, so what did okay, so we're gonna go through convention season through the eyes of James Austin. What stuck
Well,
out over the past 3 months?
well, some of the things that stuck out, actually, one of the ones, funny enough, non-convention wise, was how we talked about the death of physical media and stuff like that. And two tweets, funny enough, around the Anime Expo week, Aniplex of America sent two tweets. One tweet was "Happy 10th anniversary, Servant Time Service," or Servant X Service, and the other one was "Happy anniversary to," and that was a 10th anniversary because it was released around the same time, Silver Spoon. And both of them had only gotten DVD releases that are way out of print, and they're just streaming. And it's just kind of like, well, that's kind of interesting. It's like you're saying this is you're celebrating these series, but it's you can only find them streaming and stuff like that. There's no like physical media or anything. And it just kind of gave me a chuckle when I saw those two, and
Hmm.
especially considering they're well, what Servant Time X Service I would say is more niche. It's like a rom com slice of life. And then the other one, I'm surprised it didn't get Blu-ray. Silver Spoon. Remember, that's from the same creator as Full Metal Alchemist, except it's about farming and stuff like that. So that was kind of
I think
interesting to
that
see.
maybe the subject matter makes the suggestion why we haven't seen any further releases. I don't
Yeah.
know I don't know how it actually goes.
And the funny thing is, both of them actually have had their manga released by Yen Press, ironically enough. So,
That's just a way to put it.
but it was interesting seeing that, and then seeing because I keep up with what's releasing physically, and all of them are trudging along. But it's interesting looking at Crunchyroll or Funimation or whatever you want to call them now. It seems like one month there's next to nothing, and some months there's just a few trickled releases. Like there was a few trickled releases in November, but in October there were only 3 releases, and those 3 releases were like a Love Live season. I can't remember if it was Overfiend, Legend of the no, not Overfiend. I forget what they call it, but it was another isekai series that they had another season of, so they released that. And then the other one was a Walmart exclusive of Cowboy Bebop in a steelbook, releasing that again. And it's just like, wow, it's like they have all these series that they've put up on streaming, they've done dubs and all this stuff, but it's just even if they get a dub or I guess have a certain thing, they're not going to really do it on physical, and they're going similar, I guess, Sony, just like they're doing in their main business, and all those others are doing just like Disney and stuff like that. They just want to keep it on the platform, I guess, to get the eyes there.
Hmm.
And it was interesting looking at it that way because they talk about that way, saying, "Wow, this is like probably when the future where you see boutique publishers like Discotek having more releases in a month than a major studio and stuff like that, and even Sentai, which is still relatively small, having a few more releases than a major studio and stuff like that." So it's definitely boutique, as we said, to buy an actual physical disc or own an actual series, I guess.
Yeah, boutique is certainly an interesting word to use when we talk about it now. And it's maybe a little depressing, because time has borne out the dilemmas of always putting things on digitally. Because, it's one of those, at any second, the carpet can be yanked out from under you type stuff.
Or the contract can expire, and then they forget that it expired, or forgot to renew, or do something like that.
Something like that. I mean, and I guess we would have brought this up in the bullets, but this is a perfect time to start bringing it up now. What, almost, was it 2-3 years after it appeared on Crave and made everybody's day at the time? Has it been 3 years or 2 years? Sailor Moon is set to leave Crave, the major streaming service here in Canada, which is basically the de facto HBO streaming service here in Canada. But it licenses out other stuff as well. And it had Sailor Moon for a few years back. And our old friend Jesse Betteridge, noted that for everybody when it happened. And maybe in a full circle moment, he's noted it again now that's about to leave. And I think before the end of October, or is it before the end of September? If anybody remembers.
And I think we had talked about when it came on and stuff like that. And it definitely was a lot of nostalgia for that show from the old YTV days of the 90s and stuff like that, in the Zone era. And it was interesting to see it come back, and people have good memories. But I guess you can only keep it up there for so long, especially since that type of series, they're probably going to go to where Viz normally goes for showing those type of shows and things like that. So
Where has it been
it was
lately?
rare always to see it on something like Crave or a more mainstream streaming service.
Yeah, there's this.
That's not Netflix, just to be clear.
Yeah, what is it? Is it Retro Crush? I forgot.
No, not Retro Crush. I think it's still. I'm not sure where they're showing, because I know they did a lot of stuff with Hulu. Remember, Viz did a lot of stuff on Hulu, and so
Okay,
that's why I think they
I
did get it onto Crave and stuff like that. So I'm not sure where that leaves us in Canada at the moment for the older Sailor Moon stuff. The newer stuff is on Crunchyroll still, I believe, but the older stuff is a question mark.
I'd have to double check, look around, and I think Retro Crush. But keep in mind, I think it was also set to premiere on Pluto TV, but just as a quasi-linear type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there aren't, not the greatest options. But it's one of those moments. It's one of those sad moments, I guess. Because, like I said, at the time it happened, at the time it showed up on Crave, it was, good news for a lot of people, right?
And I'm sure it'd be a different experience, obviously, for a lot of people, because it wasn't obviously the original way they had watched the dub of Sailor Moon, stuff like that. It wasn't the one done in Toronto and stuff like that. It was the new one that had been produced by Viz in the uncut version that they were showing. So hopefully maybe that got some other people to look at some other different series and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, just for reference, Sailor Moon will stop streaming on Crave on September 17th. Hopefully this episode will be out before September 17th. It first came onto the service almost 3 years to the day. The first reports of it were September 19th on 2020. So almost 3 years to the day, Sailor Moon will come and go from Crave. Okay. Sorry, and I tangented everybody, and I hear a click. Who is coming on now? Oh, Kevin's here. We'll just give a couple seconds here to welcome Kevin into the studio. Kevin, you made it.
I'm taking a look now, Mike, and I think it may still be on Tubi.
Oh, that's
for Canada
it.
and stuff like that. Tubi
That's
TV,
the
and there
service.
is Plato TV. There's still Hulu, and I think they have put some on YouTube. It sounds like, but it sounds like it's region blocked to US only.
Okay. So, hey, Kevin.
We're recording?
Yes, we are. You're well, not live, but glad you made it. Just mentioned you probably saw the messages from Mo on the way back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's just the three of us.
Cool.
Which is fine. Well, we can go with that. So
Hello.
James was just going through well, since he hasn't been on in like 3 months, he's just going through what caught his attention through the convention season. As we start tonight.
Yeah, it's been an interesting set of announcements over the past few months.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go through things chronologically, and then I know you'll jump in as it goes. So, and we just mentioned bits about physical media over streaming media, and just had to bring up Sailor Moon leaving Crave.
Yeah, which, it's a bit of a bummer. I know Jesse mentioned it a little while ago. But, you sign these deals, they last so long, and they chose not to renew it, I guess. That's really it.
Really it.
Yeah,
okay.
No. Talk about, as I told you before, Kevin, it's like they had a few more for November, but Funimation, Crunchyroll, whatever you want to call them, had like only 3 releases in October. So it's funny seeing boutique publishers like Discotek and even Sentai now ahead of the major player in releasing physical media, and that's how we got onto it. And then the other reason I told Mike is it was during the it was during Anime Expo. Aniplex USA had put out 2 tweets for a 10th anniversary, happy 10th anniversary for Servant X Service and Silver Spoon, and it kind of left you shaking your head because you can't even get those physically anymore. They were DVD only, and now I think they're still streaming on Crunchyroll, but that's about it.
It's okay.
And
The
it makes you
license will
wonder who the
lapse.
fans are for those now, right?
The license will lapse, and then we'll just wait for Discotek to pick them up. That's kind of how it's gonna have to be nowadays.
Well, Discotek definitely has a lot on their plate because I know they had a little event at the end of June, and then they went to Otakon at the end of July, and they had their usual assortment of different announcements. They had anime, they had live action, so
they
they
did
definitely
that
have a good
surprise
mix.
screening too of the Digimon movies, and that was how they announced those, I believe.
Yep, Otakon is where they did. They said, second season of Digimon is coming up for the dub version. They'll probably do a subtitle just like they did with the first season and like they did with Sonic. And they also said, guess what? We got the movies and we're going to get back the original cast and dub the rest of the movies, not just the first one. So that's a nice surprise for a lot of people.
That's an interesting piece of news, actually, to get back the English cast.
Yeah, anytime Digimon fans came through.
Yeah, well, it's always interesting whenever Discotek commits to doing an English dub. That's always news because they've always stated to commit to every title an English dub. It's just too expensive, just too much work.
It has to be the right set of circumstances, and I think given how long those movies were, they weren't like really long and stuff like that. But you could pull it off, and especially for the type of series it was something that they knew would kind of put it over the top, so to speak, because they said
it's not that type of commitment, right?
Yeah, like, I want to see that Digimon movie uncut. The first one. I guess the first 2, technically speaking.
But
to remind the audience, that was one of the earliest directorial works of our favorite furry director, Mamoru Hosoda.
So, yeah.
That's why Summer Wars feels very similar to Digimon. Those first 1 or 2 movies. I forgot which one exactly.
There's the experience right there. Okay. All right, let's go. Let's keep going. So we're at Expo still.
It's
sticking out to you.
So I was thinking, well, Discotek had their stuff, and I was just going to quickly say they had some the usual assortment of announcements. But I think the funnier thing I saw was one of the live action ones I told you about, Kevin. The one that was, let me find it. It was the recently My Sister, that one, that live action.
The My
That,
Sister's Unusual lately, is it that or is it a different one?
correct. And so that one they were going to do a live action. And the funniest thing about that was they did that during their stream, and they actually showed the trailer, and it didn't seem like, obviously it was on the mature side and stuff like that, but supposedly it was too mature for Twitch because their Twitch channel was temporarily suspended at the end of June, funny enough, because of that. So they haven't been able to show that trailer, but that's supposedly coming out in November, I guess, just in time for Christmas, right, for everyone. But funny enough, they have had some classes, like they're bringing back Mazinger Z. I'm sure some people are happy about that. They're continuing on with Sergeant Frog. Metabots, the Japanese side, they're going to get to that. And then they're bringing back classics like Crying Freeman's coming back, Chargement Ken's coming back, Street Fighter 2, the animated film, is coming back in 4K, and more Lupin. And
I think the Street Fighter movie's already out.
I
think the Street Fighter movie's already out. I remember Justin Savakis was mentioning how well it was doing.
Yeah, no, it's already out on Blu-ray, but it just got put out for pre-order for November
for
the 4K edition.
Okay.
And yes, supposedly it is sold really well. They've been really surprised with that, but really happy. Supposedly, what was it? Gunbuster has done really, really well and stuff like that through the sale since it's released in May, which is interesting to hear.
Maybe I'm not surprised.
Yeah,
I don't come away feeling surprised to hear that.
I still never fully watched Gunbuster, but I never did replace my Bandai Visual DVD that I sold ages ago, so something to keep an eye out for myself now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because they kitchen sink disc, they got a lot on there. There's still some stuff I'm sure some people want, but they couldn't get in. I think there were some small little OVAs from the Japanese Blu-ray release they couldn't get on. They said they were going to try and do a commentary with Jonathan Clements. They couldn't get that on the disc, but if you want to watch it, it's on Justin Savakis' YouTube channel. And so you can watch that, which is interesting because he is an interesting mind on the anime academic sphere to listen to, just like Helen McCarthy and stuff like that. But other things, like I know they rescued Overman King Gengar, which I'm sure a lot of people were happy about because originally that was supposedly rescued by Sentai. So I guess we'll see what happens with those other Bandai titles and stuff like that. And then I was surprised that Cyber 6, they're going to do a full Blu-ray upgrade and Blu-ray release of Cyber 6 in October, which I think is incredible given that it's just, in my mind, still a small Japanese-Canadian co-pro, you know what I mean?
Okay.
From way back in the 90s. So I guess we have more fans in the States than we thought. And then but there's only one more title I'll throw in there, and it's because of Kevin and his love of shoujo. And that this one probably needs some love, and if it gets some sales, you never know. Maybe they'll look at some other type of older shoujo, and that's Lady Georgie. They supposedly got that for SD Blu-ray, and that'll come later on, either this year or early next year. And that's a shoujo series about this girl named Georgie that takes place in Australia and England. So,
okay.
That was a shoujo one from the 80s. It was based on a manga from a shoujo manga in the 80s, and I believe that series was done in the mid 80s and stuff like that. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So now we get to back to Anime Expo and stuff like that, and I know you guys had talked a bit about some of that stuff. I was intrigued by, as I said, I'll talk about the crowds, but if I was going to think about one announcement from Anime Expo that I saw that made me really happy, and it's hard with these conventions now because it's basically, here are the new titles for the new season you can watch on your streaming service, right? And we talked about how we love our physical media and stuff like that. So realistically, it's not anime, it's not a manga, it's actually a visual novel. and it was at the tail end of a Type Moon panel at Anime Expo, and that was Tsukihime. We did it. We got it. Tsukihime for Nintendo Switch and PS4 is coming out in 2024. We must have got enough sales and bought enough copies of Witch on the Holy Night the year before to make them think, maybe we should release this overseas and stuff like that. And they did release, Aniplex of America released, I wouldn't call it a trailer, I would call it a teaser last month at the end of August on their YouTube channel that actually shows some of the English in the game and stuff like that. So it's just like, oh, it's coming. It's coming down the pipe, and it's going to be great to see that. And hopefully it does just as well, so that they'll think to localize the second part at the same time as they release it in Japan instead of waiting later and stuff like that, because they still got 3 more story arcs to go through, supposedly.
And just to note, as again, that this is the remake of the visual novel, not the old one from 20 years ago.
Correct. Yes, it is a remake, and yes, we still have. Now it's terrible. It was Nasu. Kinoku Nasu is still returning, obviously, to write the scenario and direct and stuff, like similar to how he did with Witch on a Holy Night. But obviously, it's through a different lens to when they were doing it as a doujin effort and stuff like that. And it is rated mature, but obviously, it's not that mature as the original doujin was and stuff like that.
Yeah, because Type Moon is now above doing pornographic scenes for their visual novels now. They don't need to.
Sometimes, well, you go ahead.
And you know what it means? You know what it means? We might finally get a Tsukihime anime, James.
Yeah, no. Well, first they have to get through Witch on the Holy Night, because remember they announced that and they were going to do it in movie form. So we haven't heard any update on that from UFO Table yet as to when that's going to start to get out for those.
But there's hope.
Witch on a Holy Night.
There's hope they'll make a Tsukihime anime now.
Yeah, well, I guess if that does well too, yes, the Tsukihime anime, we can get an actual anime out there and see how it does. I know they were doing, they were on the Fate Stay Night timeline, and they were doing, what was it, the fake, what do they call it? Fake night or fake, oh, it's escaping my mind, but it was the Fate Stay Night, the one where it takes place in America and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
And it's a fake Holy Grail War and stuff like that. And so they had done a premiere in English of a special at Anime Expo. And so that seems to be what they're focused on now. It was an interesting special, and that one I know they said, oh yeah, we'll do a series of that as well. So I think that's what they're cooking up at the moment on the Type Moon UFO Table anime side.
See, this is me yelling into the void, but wake me up when they redo part 1. I'll wait. I think it'll take 15 years. I think they'll get to it eventually.
Yeah, eventually. Okay.
But thinking back on Anime Expo itself, I was just remembering seeing the photos, all that stuff, and how crowded it is and stuff like that. And it just looks like a fire hazard waiting to happen. And thinking to myself, how are they moving all these people throughout? And this is like one of the biggest convention centers probably in America, right? And you're seeing all these people just going through, just circling them around. I don't even know how they're getting them through the building and stuff like that. And they've still done things like they closed off a main street in front of the convention center to try and alleviate stuff. They still have people there. They haven't really capped tickets, it sounds like, but they got rid of the tickets that were similar to the event we went on the Labor Day weekend. That one, Anime Toronto, had regular tickets, and then there was the special ticket that could get you in the front of the line and stuff like that. And I know Anime Expo supposedly used to have that. They got rid of those. And then Anime News Network, I know, also said they got rid of room clearing. So people could just maybe, I guess, camp in a room and wait for a certain panel and stuff like that, which I'm wondering if that would cause even more problems and stuff like that, that they just kind of threw up their hands and said, well, we'll just see what happens.
Well, that could be asking for trouble.
I
That
know.
sounds like trouble. You know?
And then even Anime News Network, I know they had looked at it and stuff like that. And I know Lindsay, their head person on the editorial side, she was saying the same thing of, okay, we need to get to certain events and get the team out to certain events. And so their suggestion to them was to come to the press office so they could guide them and get them into a certain panel room or whatever if they needed to get in there. And sometimes they had to do that and finagle their way into a room and stuff like that because it was already full and stuff like that. Because basically it would be the convention staff, you know what I mean, saying whether they would let someone in or not, which is kind of wild.
Yeah, and probably would ruffle a few feathers, I'm thinking.
Yeah,
But
no. And so it sounded like it wasn't like their press, you can let them in. It was kind of like saying, oh no, they're just kind of a part of this panel. So you can just please let them in, sort of thing. That's what it sounded like, which is kind of wild.
hell, those sounds like quite a few stories and kind of past what we already thought was going on there.
And certain areas, as they said, it was like shoulder to shoulder, and you're saying, and like just one wrong thing, right? And it's like if a crowd went one way, it's like you could have a bad stampede, right? And that's what was kind of weird looking at some of the flows in certain areas and things like that.
I could see.
And they said the same things they had before. They said the artist alley was in a basement area with no airflow, and so that could lead to some problems there and stuff like that. And I guess some of the thing is you have to direct these people through certain areas because I guess some of the exhibition area they had special products and whatever that they've now brought over to Anime Expo, right? So I guess people want to be there to get certain autographs, or they want to be there to get certain special memorabilia that's on sale at a booth, right? Because some of the Japanese companies are actually coming over themselves.
Well, it's like I said, like we mentioned before, they see that market. Like the companies in Japan see that market and they're trying to come out to it now. They know maybe they've exhausted everything they can do domestically, so they have to work for it now. And sometimes they're scrambling a little bit. So,
and I think
on the topic
the other
of
thing,
things,
I think the other thing they said was the lines to nowhere. So they said sometimes you'd be in a line you didn't know where it was going, or maybe you were hoping you were in a line going to a signing area or going to a certain area, and you're not sure if you're going there, which is probably a big problem that they're going to have to figure out. And I know one of them where that came to light as well was they had the One Piece episode 1000 up. They wanted to do a celebration of that offsite away from the LA Convention Center at the Grammy Museum, right? And that supposedly was at an event space called the Rooftop Terrace. And supposedly that kind of went a little sideways, to say the least, because they had a line to this Rooftop Terrace part of the Grammy Museum, almost stretching back to the convention center. It was a capacity of 400, but they were only probably going to be able to let 100 people up. There was only one exit and entrance in and out, and they didn't have a list of the special guests. So the attendees and the special guests were all in the same line, supposedly, it sounds like, which is kind of wild to think. And so somehow they got some of them in there somehow, but some of them were in the sun, some of them were, so there was just a mess to be had there. And then I think once they finally got up there, they saw some of the stuff, the paraphernalia of One Piece, and got to go there. There was actually no seating for when they were watching the 1000th episode, the dub and stuff like that, after there were opening remarks. Supposedly it sounded like they were sitting on the floor. That's what they were saying.
A little much. Okay. Well, we just talked about that, but I mean, we talked about crowd issues, Anime North scene versions of it, FanExpo scene versions of it.
I know we've talked about it, I know, and we've seen the fire marshal shut down FanExpo for a tiny bit in the early days, and it was just because they couldn't use the South building and they were only in the North building. But I don't think I've seen something quite like that. Like I've seen stuff where it's like we're still moving, and yeah, it was a big crowd at FanExpo, but you were still moving around. This one, it looked like it was just a sea of people and stuff like that. It made you wonder, well, sooner or later, Anime Expo is going to have to figure out some way to deal with this. And then the other question is, even if you could move it, where would you move it? Because this is already one of the biggest convention centers and areas, and probably in California. And then you think about San Diego Comic-Con too, which is probably a similar event. And I'm not sure. I feel like they have to be dealing with similar issues too, right? Especially given how many people are coming to watch different pop culture events and different anime events and stuff like that, right?
Oh yeah. So I don't know. You just look at this with awe. In my case, because 3 years into the pandemic, and people, I guess, just are looking for reasons to get out. I mean, this was the didn't see it coming moment that Anime North, pardon me, had last year. And I think a lot of the conventions are having, or a lot of the big conventions are having a didn't see it coming moment when it came to attendance.
I would say that's true for a lot of the conventions. I think Anime Expo and San Diego Comic-Con or a FanExpo, you shouldn't have that didn't see it coming moment and stuff like that, unfortunately. So I think it's going to be the same thing year after year, and they have to figure out a way to get through it. And maybe that means being more proactive in capping their attendance into the tickets they sell and stuff like that. And they said some of the other problem, I think they said with, you know, how I said there was no clearing of the rooms, so someone could maybe just camp in a room for like a special guest or for whatever. So some of that could relate to, they said they were having issues with Anime Expo finding volunteers.
Sounds
familiar. They probably need a lot of volunteers to help run that through, because that's a lot of people coming to that convention.
Sounds very familiar. Okay. Is there any other announcements or anything else that sticks out? Or because, you know, we're talking Anime Expo, but let's reel it home for just a little bit too.
I was thinking of going to the next event in my mind, which was FanExpo and stuff like that. And the only reason FanExpo came to mind is because of Crunchyroll and stuff like that. Because we had talked about, remember, Mike, how we remember FanExpo before it was FanExpo, right? So you had Comic-Con, you had CN Anime and stuff like that. And how over time the anime content kind of went down and down and down to where it almost feels non-existent, right?
It's interesting you put it that way, James, because anime content does exist at FanExpo. It is put on there, but obviously it's not many really think of it. And I'm not going to say it's a tragedy. It's just the way things have gone. It's like all the other aspects of the umbrella known as FanExpo. And James just hinted at it. FanExpo is not the name this convention has gone under through its entire history. It used to be just a bunch of brands that, like, what is it? Like the Canadian National Expo Comic-Con and CN Anime.
I forget if the sci-fi and the horror was blended in there as well into one of the umbrellas to the comic side, I believe.
It was.
Branches, yes. It's a long history. And then at a point, and I forgot exactly when the FanExpo name started to really come in.
It was the mid-aughts, I want to say.
Like, yeah,
it was like, I want to say like 07, maybe, like around,
it was late, mid to late aughts. It wasn't 05, 06, but 07 sounds about right.
Yeah, and the brand is stuck, obviously,
because they want something to encompass everything, which is fine. And
it's just
they wanted to become like San Diego Comic-Con, and they definitely became that. And obviously, anime became less of a part of that. But obviously, with the way it's went over the pandemic, as we've talked,
Oh,
anime,
and
the
probably
stock in anime probably has went up. So they have obviously explored that more. And it was interesting that it wasn't till August 10th there was an announcement from Crunchyroll in regards to FanExpo, and they said, "Oh, we're coming to FanExpo. We're coming to Toronto," and that's probably the first time in a long time they had an industry presence. And so basically,
it's just an
Crunchyroll came to
yeah.
FanExpo.
And when you
They
say
brought some. Go ahead.
and when you say industry presence, we're talking about an anime industry presence at FanExpo.
Yeah,
Canada.
because they had Jenny on and stuff like that in the early aughts and things like that, and we've had guests in that. But it's been a long, long time, I feel, since they had an industry presence from an anime side and stuff like that, or any side of the Japanese side at FanExpo.
Yeah, like I honestly can't think of anybody since Jenny. Like maybe Funimation 1 year, like back when they were a lot bigger. You know, this is pre Crunchyroll, but yeah, I can't really think of much otherwise.
And they would bring the English voice actors and stuff from Funimation and things like that up to FanExpo. And there's some people that love to come to that event, which is great. It's just nothing too much on the industry side, and to the extreme that this announcement, because looked at, I didn't go to FanExpo, but from what me and Kevin heard, it was interesting what they brought over. So they brought some premieres. They brought some premieres from the next season, like The Rising of the Shield Hero Season 3, Episode 1. They brought MF Ghost Episode 1 as well. That's the Initial D type anime. And then Ancient Magus Bride Season 2, they brought an episode of that. They brought I Shall Survive Using Potions, Episode 1. They also brought Firefighter Daigo, Rescuer in Orange, the first episode, which technically was not a Canadian premiere because, ironically, the week before at Anime Revolution, that had already been shown there. And we'll probably get into that when we get into Anime Toronto, because that was interesting. And as well, they actually had a Crunchyroll industry panel at FanExpo and stuff like that. So the first industry panel by an anime company in a long time, and that had Lauren Moore and Tim Liu, which I believe they're part of the marketing team on Crunchyroll. And then they actually had a booth, an interactive booth at FanExpo. And this isn't just like some small shoddy booth, just here's some merch. It was a full-on interactive booth, they said, and me and Kevin saw an Instagram of it, and there was lineups to get into this booth, and it was
from
Jujutsu Kaisen Experience.
I think
That's
I
what
saw
it
that
was.
Instagram too. It's from William, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah,
And it was definitely an experience, and people seemed to enjoy it. They also got some freebies. I think they said like some character cards from Jujutsu Kaisen, a poster from Spy Family. They had some other things that they were giving away as freebies. But this booth experience definitely was like not something you would put together like overnight. Like it was definitely quite a booth, like something they put at San Diego Comic Con, something like that, or Anime Expo. So you rarely see that type of thing at a anime con in Canada. So I could see why they would want to say, okay, we'll go to FanExpo to give that experience and stuff like that. And then they had some other parts of their booth, but definitely interesting for the people who went to see it. It would have made me think, do I want to go for a day? Probably still wouldn't have went, because it probably would have been very crowded to get through those crowds to get to those
would have been
events and that booth,
anime.
which probably was an event in itself.
Yeah, but
It
would
gives
it have
me
been?
slight optimism of maybe they'll ramp it up a little more next year, and maybe they'll get guests I care about, and maybe I'll consider going back one day, because I have not been to FanExpo since, I want to say, 2018, 2017.
That's more recent than me. I'll say that.
And I haven't been. I
is
haven't
what I
gone
was
to a
thinking
full
for
weekend
myself.
in more than 10 years too. Like, because I just don't think a full weekend's worth it anymore, because I'm not interested in much else. So then I'm done in like 3 hours. tops. That's
Yeah,
me actually going through Artist Alley too, because then I run out of things to look at, and maybe there aren't other panels that intrigue me.
well,
Although the panels have gotten a little better post-pandemic. Well, I shouldn't say
Mhm.
post-pandemic, but they've gotten better panels related to Japanese culture and anime since the pandemic happened.
Okay. I believe that. It's just the way I sort of start to look at it is, well, the Asian pop culture thing and anime again has become relatively significant in the wider pop culture sphere in North America. So the idea that FanExpo wants to try and begin to recapture some of that isn't a huge surprise.
And it was
Although I'm wondering, is this one of those train left the station type things for FanExpo? Because, I mean, when you start to look at the history of anime programming at FanExpo, there are stories and maybe some hard feelings from our fandom when you look at what happened in the mid-aughts.
Ultimately, I feel it comes to them seeing if the money is there. So I'm sure the organizers saw the amount of people going into the Jujutsu Kaisen experience. So you would hope that they go, oh, there is money in this.
And I guess going into that Crunchyroll viewing room and panel and stuff like that, and see how many people were going into that. So it sounds like the numbers were good, and they gave reasons for people to maybe want to see those premieres and stuff like that, because it's harder to get people to go into a video room, right?
These days, yeah.
And then it was interesting when you think about, because we saw it, because obviously ad space, you can't just do it for like one weekend or one event. But I guess they got lucky, as they say, is Crunchyroll bought ad space in Union Station, a major train station downtown Toronto, right near the convention center, for obviously Fan Expo, but then for the weekend for the anime event we went to. And it was interesting that they had the Jujutsu Kaisen advertising in full force on both floors on their rotating advertisements, which is something I don't think many of us thought we'd see in a long time, right? So
It certainly grabbed my attention when I saw it there last
but
weekend.
now it makes sense why they would choose that show, because that was what their space was about, that experience, that thing was. So, which is interesting.
But it
And
does leave.
obviously, that new season is coming up, so that is a big reason to do it. And I guess that's what they feel is the big push.
Do you think Crunchyroll was aware of Anime Toronto being the following weekend? And I say this, and I want you to hear me out on this thought, because remember, Crunchyroll had a presence at the original IFF too back in 2019 at the original IFF Toronto.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how much Crunchyroll paid attention to knowing Anime Toronto would have been the following weekend.
I
And
think they would know because of the fact that Anime Toronto, or IFF, whatever you want to call it, is an offshoot of Anime Revolution, and they obviously had the Daigo at Anime Revolution and Anime Toronto. To get that, they would have to go through Crunchyroll and stuff like that. So I think they would have had to know, and they probably set up when that was going to show at Union Station to match up with those two events. Probably
it
might
probably
be
didn't
just
take
for a month.
Yeah, it probably didn't cost them too much more to increase their time.
And it was probably in the budget
rental
for
space.
setting up the booth and everything, right? So,
So it was kind of shrewd in that sense. As I said, I'm really curious to know what will become of anime programming at Fan Expo now, because as I said, it's gotten somewhere. It's gotten some significance that it's not a joke for geek fandom anymore in North America. But that now leads us to Anime Toronto. Do we want to segue there now?
yeah, we might as well, segue our way there. It's funny when we were talking about Fan Expo and our last experiences, and I just remember my last experience was going there as a fan, and obviously it wasn't as many people as they probably were over the last event, but I think I must have went just on a Thursday, and there was still a fair amount of people. But I just remember us going down, I can't remember if it was York Street or wherever it was, and they had us go through an underground parking lot to get to the ticket spot to get our ticket, and then into the South Building underground.
Oh, I remember this.
And
Oh, I
it
remember this
just,
too,
I'm
because
just
that was
thinking,
my last visit there. It was
and just thinking about that, and it's like crazy how many people and how they shepherd and how at ease it was getting through that. And that's why I was thinking
that was the
about
strange
Anime
thing. Yeah.
Expo, and I'm like, so if we can do that, how do you do that in other locations? Because it's just gargantuan task, right? And how
Yeah,
you would do that now with Fan Expo, since I'm sure they have even more people, right?
yeah. I that did stick out to me. I remember that part of the experience, having to buy the ticket, and it was a
And the
1 day.
only reason I say that before we go here is when obviously smaller event for Anime Toronto. So when we went to get our tickets, we didn't have to go through an underground garage or anything like that. We just had to go to the North Building and to the reception area, and there were just a few small lines, and we just had to show our receipt to someone, and they graciously gave us a pass and stuff like that. So it was really no pain and stuff like that, but interesting nonetheless.
Where else do you want to really start with the Anime Toronto discussion? Because that was the experience too. I can't.
I
Mine was
guess
I came on the Friday after work, got there, got there pretty much not less than an hour before the vendors hall closed. But I was, it didn't take me too long to get my pass. And I forgot I had a pass. I mentioned in the Space Heater chat I wasn't going to go, but then I realized, oh wait, did I keep rolling that thing over the past 4 years?
And you did.
I did. So I found out that my pass bought at the end of 2019, I believe it was, had rolled over all that time. So I
no,
had
they kept records.
really
So.
good. Yeah, it was good.
So no, I think they honored everyone who wanted to roll over. They honored them and stuff
And
like
this was the
that.
last year they'd roll over. So
And it was interesting. Actually, it's funny when I went to pick up my pass on the Friday at around, I want to say 11 a.m. or so. I actually went to the regular line, and then the guy that was doing the premier line, because I guess there wasn't many picking up a premier pass, he just said, "Come on over."
or
Got
they
the
got him
pass,
already.
and away I went. And I saw a few panels and stuff like that. Checked out the vendors hall, which almost was a carbon copy of what IFF was in 2019, though they had for the autograph lines and that learn their lessons. It looks like from the 2019 event. It sounded like one person I talked to when I was in line for Yukana on the Saturday morning had a flashback from then, so he was kind of like in a tizzy. But they did a lot better. They got people into the line, and then they set up a thing at the back of the hall where they set up taped lines and said, okay, any overflow, we're going to put you here and stuff like that. They didn't have them sending them all the way back through the vendors hall, which was, I think, a big problem of the 2019 event.
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
And it wasn't like every man for himself. Like people, I do agree, there was a lot of people there, Kevin, when we arrived first thing Saturday morning and stuff like that, and it built up.
Yeah.
And people, they weren't running to get to the autographs, but definitely a lot of people were going close to there first. It looked like when I was going there.
Okay.
And the other thing that was of interest, and this is true for Anime Toronto, and then for the convention Anime Revolution, their main con that they held 2 weeks before in August in Vancouver. And the events before always allowed you to bring personal items to have the guest sign, I mean, to works they were related to, and they had to be official. And they'd usually, one person before would just have a look, make sure it isn't anything that is contraband, I mean, like unofficial or
Contraband.
anything. Contraband. It could be contraband. You never know. People bring odd things to sign, Kevin.
Yep.
But suffice to say, this time for both Anime Revolution and for us at Anime Toronto, we didn't know till we looked at the website for the guests, and it was definitely on the Japanese guests for Yukana definitely for oh, I'm forgetting his name. Atsushi Abe. For
Yes.
those two, they had uh, a thing under their autograph thing. They talked about pricing, and I'm looking at it. It's like no personal items. It's like okay. It's like you can get a free autograph, but it has to be on the badge. And
Ugh.
so I only saw one person that did that. So then, what's our other option? Guess what? You got to pay more money to get Shikashi, a signboard, signed by them. And that was interesting too, because I went back, and I'm sure some people may have looked back if they knew that Anime Revolution was associated with Anime Toronto, and saw that at Anime Revolution 2 weeks ago, they had the same policy for the first time there. And the thing with that was those signboards were $20 for the Japanese guests and stuff like that. At Anime Toronto 2 weeks later, somehow we had a price bump of $15 and we were at $35.
It's not
which
somehow, James, and you know that.
it just did not leave a good taste in the mouth. I decided I really want to get something signed by Yukana. And so I bit the bullet, and that's the only one I paid money to get a signature for, was for Yukana, because she had played Meilin in Cardcaptor Sakura. She had played in Full Metal Panic, Tessa, and stuff like that. And obviously, she was in many more different series that people loved and knew in video games and anime.
For me, it would have been C2 from Code Geass, but I elected not to get a signature because it had been so long since Code Geass for me that my gut feeling was that I hesitated, and so I thought, you know what? If I'm not chomping at the bit to get one signed, then I won't. Although I will say, if it was Callan who came instead, that may have been a different story. Probably would have I probably would have bit the bullet if it was Callan's voice actress, who I believe is Ami Koshimizu. I'd have to double check, but I elected not to.
But it was interesting, like thinking on the pricing and stuff like that. I feel like they definitely, after some of the stuff they had and things like that, I think they were like, you know what? We don't want to deal with lines. We're just going to say, okay, here's your choices. Good luck. There were still had an overflow line. So obviously it didn't deter everyone. And then if you really wanted it, you could pay the ridiculous premium badge price of over $200. And there were some people in
Yeah.
line for that. But interesting for those premium badge people, guess what? For paying that ridiculous price, they got one free signboard signing for one of the guests.
Well,
And supposedly that came with controversy at Anime Revolution, because I guess they didn't put it in clear writing, so they had an amendment on the Anime Revolution
addendum,
site.
Yep.
Saying that no, you don't get a free signing for each guest, only one guest.
Whew.
So I guess they must have had someone confront them or complain or whatever. But obviously
Choose
for
one,
this one,
right?
they were
choose one, and
I
we'll.
think
and
most
we'll
people
punch your-
chose
and we'll punch
Yukana.
your
I think is what happened.
and punch your and then we'll punch your ticket. Well, I mean, if you
most men would have chose Yukana, and
then
most
and both girls. How
and
many
female
girls?
fans would have likely went with Abe, because he's in a fair amount of those Ikemen shows lately.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. Was the premium pass like? I thought of that more as a male purchase type thing. How many females? How many women would have bought that premium pass?
I saw a few women with it.
I did see a few women with it as well. There obviously was not as many as the regular pass, but there was still, I think, a fair split between male and female from what we saw.
Okay.
And then it was interesting, yeah. So we got through those lines, and it was interesting when you think about for previous conventions, because I've seen it on the dub side. It's interesting how we've been so used to going to a convention and being able to bring an official piece of merchandise, getting it signed for free on the anime side. And I forget now that even on the dub side, they have like price lists for some of these dub actors and all these things. And it's crazy how much it costs to have a picture, how much to have an autograph, how much to have a recording of their voice and the character of your choice for their voicemail and stuff like that. Some of the things
See,
they'll do, and I can't fault them for it because
and
I
that's
mean
the
they
thing.
got to hustle, they got to get some money for themselves. But it's crazy how it's exploded in certain aspects of it.
And with the ongoing actors and writers strike going in the States, it's shone a spotlight on some of them really do have to hustle. I don't really know what it would be like in Japan for such
And
talent.
that's, I think, the other reason me and Kevin don't feel great about paying the price to Anime Toronto, Anime Revolution, because they're probably pocketing the money.
That's the other part.
They are not. I don't think it's
wonder.
going like, yeah, some of it's going to the Japanese guys because they brought them over. They get to enjoy some of the different sights and sounds. For us in Toronto, a lot of them like to go to Niagara Falls and things like that. But at the end of the day, I don't think they're giving a bit of that autograph thing specifically to the guests. It's just whatever the normal rate is to get them over and things like that. I think they pocket whatever.
That's I was
like I know with the English voice actors, they're likely to be pocketing more of it. I don't know the exact agreements, right? But I feel for the Japanese side, I suspect it's most likely going to
the agency, or
no, it's most likely going to Anime Toronto's coffers.
Well, they get to build it up. Yeah, but on top of that, is it aside from just that, like the most obvious part, the whole dollar bill y'all aspect, is there another reason we came to this point? Is it to cut lines? Is it to prevent signed merchandise from going on eBay? Or were those part of the motivations for this policy?
Funny enough, I took a look, Kevin, because we were thinking about it. But one of the things in their thing about autographs with the Japanese guests on both Anime Revolution and Anime Toronto, they actually allowed people that you could get one autograph from the guest from each signing and stuff like that. So it wasn't like you went to one signing and then you were done. You could keep on going back, which is kind of nuts. Because all you have is just your badge and the signboard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if it was allowing personal items, you could understand why myself or Kevin might go and bring a different manga or something like that. But
yeah, and that's what
if you're just getting a signboard, I think you got to be respectful and just go with the once.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking when I said all of this being flipped items going up on eBay, that's what I referred to by personal items. I was thinking personal items, get them signed.
That was the thing I was hearing around the con, as in why they possibly went with just shikishis, because this was a problem at Anime Expo, apparently.
This has been a thing since.
This happened at this year's Anime Expo, where people were getting multiple items signed, like Funko Pops and stuff, and then people were trying to butt in line, like those, like, because they would have groups and then try and get things signed, and then they would put them up on eBay afterwards. That was the plan. So they were apparently some people being aggressive and trying to cut in line and stuff, and people, of course, were not happy. So that was the supposed reason why the shikishi policy was put in place as well.
Mm-hmm.
Giving us talking about the lines at Anime Expo, it's like it's amazing people would have the balls to even do that, given how tight it is trying to get from place to place or to even figure out what line you're in.
Well, yeah, it is a ballsy thing to do. Okay, but there's another aspect that we sort of learned, and that was talking with some of our Japanese friends. Remember that conversation we had on Friday, I believe, and our mutual friend Kevin. She told us also that sometimes in Japan, a lot of fans can't get this close to a lot of their favorite voice actors.
What I don't know exactly, what I should have clarified with her with, was if it was straight up this would never happen, period, or if this wouldn't happen without being part of the fan club and then joining a lottery for the signings and stuff, or the handshake events, because I know that can be a thing as well.
And I think that's more of what it is when you're going to concerts or you're going to events for these type of voice actors and stuff like that, and they have an event where you can get things signed and stuff. Yeah, it's probably something given to you that you can get signed. Sometimes you don't have a choice, and then you still have to get into the event, which, as you said, Kevin, you may have to buy something to get a code to get into a lottery to get the ticket, or you have to be in the fan club to then get a chance to get a, you know what I mean, a chance for the lottery. Like there's all sorts of weird ways.
Well, yeah, but when
It's
I
not as
heard,
simple as buying a ticket to an event and then knowing they're going to show up there.
yeah, there's a few hoops, but it kind of, how do I put this? Remember when Halko Momoi went to Anime North? I think it was in 2008, and much of her fan club from overseas came to that event as well. And we found out it sounded like it was just a chance to get up close, a little bit more up close than they probably would in Japan. And then you hear stories about them really dominating the resulting auction later on, right? But it was just like, it made me think of that, of a lot of the things that surrounded her appearance when I heard that story.
Or
So,
trying to get into the concert itself and stuff
yeah,
like that. And that was a hot weekend, I remember too. So I remember that one well.
yeah, it was just kind of interesting in that sense.
But it was still quite an event to see happen
Well,
and take place and even have them participate in. And they definitely brought a lot of energy to the concert too.
yeah, they did. Okay, so just general takes on the convention. I mean, I'll come out and say it, but I didn't expect the greatest amount from the vendors hall, from at least on my level. Of course, what my preferences and what I'm looking for are probably different from a lot of the current fandom, the current generation of the fandom. So, in one sense, I wasn't disappointed, and some of it's also the hangover from FanExpo the week before. But what was your observations about the vendors hall?
I think it was a carbon copy of the 2019 event. So it was nothing really to speak of. There was larger showing on the Artist Alley side. Hopefully they found some sales and stuff like that. It's interesting when we were talking about autographs and how they did all this stuff. I wonder if they would have got way more premium passes sold if it was like the 2019, because remember in 2019 they had most of the Fate Stay Night uh, seiyus come to that event. So if they ever do an event like that, I'm sure they'll get the sales and they'll have people lining up again. So it'll be interesting. But the guests were still great that they brought over on both the Japanese side, the English side. Then they had some pop culture figures like PJ Phil and stuff like that. Remember from YTV and stuff like that. So Phil Guerrero.
On the
So he came on Saturday, and so that was interesting to see. And I saw with Kevin Yukana's panel on Saturday, which had some interesting questions. They were lighthearted questions from the staff, but then once they actually had some really nice questions from the audience, because that's a coin flip. You never know how it's going to go, but they went half hour over, so they went an hour and a half with the questions, and it was quite interesting to see her talk about her different experiences. Unfortunately for her, as she said, she did get to go to Niagara Falls. She did want to see that, but she said her luggage was lost when she came over to Anime Toronto in Toronto, and so she was trying to get that back, which she's luckily said she was able to get her luggage back. But as they said, air travel is still fraught with issues even now. And then the other things we saw the sound director they brought over to Anime Revolution and to Anime Toronto, Takashi Takadera, and he knows a bit of English, so he spoke a bit in English, and he had done Oshi no Koi as his last one for sound directing, but the one he's working on now is the Firefighter Daigo anime that's coming up. And so he brought to Anime Revolution and to Anime Toronto the first episode. So me and Kevin watched that and we enjoyed that. And Takadera also basically answered a few questions. He answered one of Kevin's, so that was nice. And he also did a rock, paper, scissors because he brought 3 posters that were signed by the 3 main leads, I believe, of Firefighter Daigo for people to win in the eye. So that was really nice to see and stuff like that. And then there were some intriguing fan panels that they had and stuff like that, a mix of them that I went to on the Friday and Saturday and Sunday.
Takadera, I have to bring him up because I didn't see the greatest amount. I saw like the last 15 minutes of his Sunday panel, but it brought back so many great memories of what he did in 2019, and how colorful he is, how concise, how he's a guy you could just sit and listen to. And I got that sense again in those final 15 minutes too. But I just remember, how detailed he was with his work as a voice director, and I'm pretty sure that came out again. I know that came out again in his panel on Sunday.
So. And yeah, me and Kevin had went to the panel where it was Takadera and then Abe together on Sunday morning, and that was a fun one because they had worked together on some series and stuff like that. So it was kind of this back and forth between obviously how they work together as sound director and the seiyuu and stuff like that. And it was interesting questions from both the con and from the people in attendance and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, yeah, it's just, as I said, I never really had the chance to soak it in as much as you guys did, because I only saw the last couple hours each day because I was working. So I would work, and then depending on my energy level after work, I would be able to come down, and I could only see so much each time I went down. Got into some nice conversation, saw some interesting things. Also realized once again how old I am, because some of those things I couldn't get into as much. But
they had some VTubers too, and it sounds like the VTuber panel they had on Sunday, they definitely needed, like, they had the main room and then an overflow room, and they definitely used both rooms for that VTuber event they had on the Sunday. So definitely people came for that as well. So they definitely got people in for the different Japanese guests, the VTubers, and even though it felt small and kind of similar, as you said, for IFF 2019, it felt like a CN anime event from way back in the day, right? And maybe that feels because we were in the same building, you know what I mean? The same space.
Oh, yeah. See, when we did it in 2019, I just tried to imagine the CN anime stuff from almost 20 years before. So, go ahead.
And this one, maybe it felt a tiny bit smaller. They didn't use the bottom floor for those big events. They just had
like the
main floor and then the upper part for the vendors hall and stuff like that. And the other interesting thing they didn't have here, they had in the 2019 event, and they even had it at Anime Revolution 2 weeks before. They didn't have a video room, which was intriguing because you usually would think maybe you have a small video room just in case someone wants to do something else or take a quick break and watch something, you know what I mean? But there was no video room, which was interesting too.
Yeah, that was just, well, maybe that's
it's not needed, but as we had talked about before, but it was interesting.
Times.
I think the only thing, if you had wanted to watch something, was the premiere of Fighter Daigo, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm. In many respects, it was like they had taken steps back, but that was just, you can blame the pandemic. And it's also clear they haven't given up on Toronto. They'll be back. I just don't know exactly when.
But yeah, no, they definitely filled the rooms. Like the Yukana panel was completely full for that main events room. The same for probably the VTubers and stuff like that. Some of the other Yukana panels were probably well attended. The one we went to with the sound director and the voice actor, Abe and Takadera, it was not, it was maybe half full, would be generous. So not too full, but not that it was empty, but it was a little less full. And then even for the Firefighter Daigo, that one was more, I would say, just half full as well and stuff like that. But that still was a
Mhm.
good showing, I'd say.
Yeah.
But
Ultimately, the comparisons are going to be there, though. Like, the comparisons are going to be there. Anime North, Fan Expo. Where does this ultimately sit for fandom? Especially Anime North. And when we walked around, we kept seeing familiar faces from Anime North, too. Got into some really interesting conversations. So, a quick yes or no, James. And Kevin can come in, too. Does this in some ways start to bail out Anime North? I mean, somebody said, Kevin a couple years ago said, maybe now with IFF now here and the stuff that we know they can potentially give in terms of international guests, in some respects that could take Anime North off the hook just a little bit over those type of things. I
I guess
know.
I can see what you say, because it's kind of like they kind of complement each other. Like one, it's like fan event run by the fans. You come and meet your old friends. You enjoy the hobbies you enjoy together, right? And then you can go to event if you want to see some high profile guests and stuff like that, and meet some people and see some cosplay. You can do that. So it's kind of like similar but different.
Yeah, it's also.
How kind of CN Anime and Anime North kind of worked in the past, even though we know obviously they had their competition with each other, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, and we thought it would be a little bit more heated, but really it's just not there anymore. And maybe that's the point. It's just you get the feeling you can't feel that's not going to be there here in this instance either. But we do get the sense it's a bit of a culture shift for fandom in Toronto, because then we're going to see a contrasting way to do these, like a very different way of doing these type of conventions. We're going to be, Toronto's going to have a chance to see what it's like to see a more commercial type anime convention.
But that said, you never know, because each year is different for guests for Anime North. This year, I think they had some really good guests because they brought some people from Studio Orange over, and that got a lot of good feedback from people and had a full panel when they did their panels and stuff like that at the Congress Center. And so it was nice to see that industry guests and stuff, because sometimes you don't always see it. That's why it was nice to see Takadera-san there over the Labor Day weekend, hear his perspectives along with the voice actors and stuff like that too, right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, but it just has me wondering what the future does hold.
And then that allows some of the other events to bring other different guests, because obviously Anime North, they haven't really brought any manga guests or stuff like that, or light novel guests. And I'm not sure that the people that run Anime Toronto or Anime Revolution, they do get Japanese guests, but I'm not sure they get too many on the manga and light novel side. So places like TCAF, and even the event that we'll talk about maybe a little later on in the what is it, Toronto International Festival of Authors. It's interesting that they could bring in some Japanese guests on the manga side and stuff like that. And we've been really lucky to have one of those maybe once per year from places like that or TCAF.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, you just.
even the Japan Foundation for that matter, because I know they help in those type of events for TCAF and stuff like that.
Okay.
It was end of summer. We had the CNE finishing up. We had the air show in the air as we were there at the Toronto Convention Center. And the other thing in the air, as I remember talking to someone else, was the stars and TIFF. And they were
Mm-hmm.
still sparkling, even though, yes, there is a writer's strike going on down south. But the interesting thing is, we were thinking about was the premiere movie for Toronto International Film Festival, which was a first for it at the Roy Thompson Hall. And the unlikely thing to kick it all off was a Hayao Miyazaki movie and his new movie. And that is, I'd say, a big accomplishment and obviously if you picked any anime that was probably going to lead off, obviously it would be something like a Hayao Miyazaki movie. But The Boy and the Heron kicked it off. The premiere outside Japan was at TIFF on the Thursday night at Roy Thompson Hall, and I'm sure that would be a great thing for people, because I'm sure it wasn't obviously just people that are fans of anime, but and animation, but they had just regular movie fans and entertainment fans. So different people had a different look at one aspect of our fandom, and hopefully got an interest to maybe see another movie if they ever see it down the road. You know what I mean?
Yeah, although when Mo was here briefly, he talked a little bit about, tickets going a little bit more than it.
Yeah, Ticketmaster was the official merchant for Toronto International Film Festival. So yes, there was probably going to be scalping. Luckily, it wasn't as bad as some of the other high-profile movies. But yes, $300 on StubHub to get those tickets, which is kind of crazy. But before we kick off to Kevin on his thoughts on Anime Toronto, I think the other thing of note is that obviously they brought someone from Studio Ghibli to the premiere on Thursday. Obviously, they didn't bring Hayao Miyazaki and stuff like that, but they brought one of the Studio Ghibli VPs, Junichi Nishoka, and basically he was on there, and he told us, I think, the worst kept secret that we knew was going to happen, and that is, of course, Hayao Miyazaki at 82 is not going to retire. He's just going to keep on working, and that he's already in the office coming up with new ideas for whatever he decides to do next and stuff like that.
Why shouldn't we be surprised?
Yeah, because his son doesn't do the best work, unfortunately.
Okay.
And then the other thing to kick off is, because that was probably the kickoff for the thing that day we got from G Kids, guess what? We are going to get this out into theaters as we knew they would. And I guess the sub and dub are going to be out. I think it's December 8th. So in December, we're going to see that out, which is great to see. And we'll probably watch that when it comes out. And of course, G Kids had to do a teaser, even though in Japan they said, no, we're not going to do a teaser. We're not doing a trailer. We're not doing anything. We're just going to send the movie to theaters, and they got the people in the seats.
And that's
I'm guessing for this teaser, they had to go to, obviously, G Kids has a great relationship with Studio Ghibli, and that's how they've been, because they've been getting their theaters continually, showing them in theaters, right, every year, and doing the festival of their different
most
films,
years,
rotating them out.
Not every year lately,
but obviously that makes them feel good, like compared to Disney, where it was just kind of sitting on a shelf, so to speak, that they want to celebrate their films. So I think probably in the negotiation they had the trust and said, okay, we'll let you do a small teaser for the international version and let them send it out. So, and obviously they could do it because it's already been out for a number of weeks and a couple months so far in Japan already. So that probably helps.
It's like, well, no, they had to, it's like they went up to Ghibli and said, look, this is how we live, man. We can't just not promote this thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, what works in Japan doesn't necessarily work outside of it.
Yep. How does Studio Ghibli live? By not putting out promotions.
Well, it was easy in Japan. That much I know.
And we know, obviously, with the merchandise and stuff like that, they limited how much. But then once Miyazaki and Suzuki found out that some of them were selling more, they were ticked off, and how long it took for them to convince them, could we maybe do a theme park?
Okay. Right,
I still will always call it, How Do You Live? How do you live?
Well, that's the book. Maybe I'll read the book. I always said I'd want to read the book.
I know, because he bases so many off of different books and different things, but it'll be interesting to see what happens come December. Maybe we'll see it together. But as for Kevin, what were your final thoughts on Anime Toronto? I know you actually took a peek at the Discord, because I know they had an official Discord, like every event or everything has nowadays, right?
Okay, Kevin, give us your thought, and then I'll ask you that question, okay?
Day one, very quiet. I didn't get there till past 5 o'clock. And then I was probably through that dealer's room within 30 minutes. That's generous.
I was gonna say that's a generous statement because I said it was the same as 2019. Like I can literally like roadmap it almost the same.
So, from my understanding, the vendors who had applied for 2020 were grandfathered in, and then any other new vendors had actually applied through a lottery system for the remaining tables. So, but the interesting thing was that with Artist Alley, there were a surprising amount of empty tables, even on the weekend. Because I could understand maybe not showing up on the Friday, but Sunday was interesting. And based on what I see and read on the Anime Toronto Discord server, by and large, the artists were not happy with how they were placed and how the configuration of Artist Alley was, because the way I see it is that if you front load the retail vendors at the front and you have the Artist Alley at the back, there's a good chance you won't have people going all the way to the back to explore. I did find that layout a little precarious for Artist Alley. If anything, the only way you could possibly save that was when you have like the autograph lines, like the overflow from the autograph lines, because that would run
Because
across the back.
they were behind them, right? So
Yeah, it's I've been skimming the feedback channel, and yeah, not a lot of happy people. Some people were saying they even lost money at the con this year, and usually you make money in Artist Alley because your fellow creators may support you, and then you do have people that will come just to buy like art and accessories and whatnot. Like I have a couple friends, that's what they primarily buy when they go to these cons. So it's really hard to sum up all the problems at once, but it got to a point where the chat got heated in that the owner actually had to come forward to address a number of concerns and
Interesting.
issues. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So, well, I guess with that having said all of that, I don't have to bring up the whole. Like we were talking, also just
I
maybe I
feel like
shouldn't be
it's
surprised
very
for starters. Maybe I shouldn't just be
this
surprised.
layout wasn't different. I don't feel like this was any different in 2019. Oh yeah, so the owner and founder of the con had to step in to address some of the concerns. And of course, these are feedback that they need to take into consideration. Who knows what they will take into consideration, because it'll be at least another several months before they would do another con here. And who knows if they're going to even do it downtown again.
well, I think the one they want to do 2020 in July was at the Metro Convention Center, so I think they would do it there again. But the question is, where do they want a regular date in the calendar to put it? Do they want it in the summer or wherever? Because the first one, 2019, was an Easter weekend, and then this one was Labor Day weekend. So it'll be interesting to see where they would fit themselves in the calendar if they want to make it an annual event.
Okay, so let me see. I'm going to read some of these. I'm going to read the remarks by the founder. Just got to find them first.
Okay. And then maybe we'll just end the chatter.
Although while I look for it, I will say that I was super happy to see that episode 1 of Firefighter Daigo.
I had mentioned that. Yes, you are quite
Yeah,
happy, and we got
yeah,
some
it's
Q
just.
and A after that, which was nice. And they had brought 3 posters signed by the 3 main seiyus, so that was really nice too.
I mean, yeah. If I'm to be positive, it was just nice to soak in the atmosphere. It wasn't a bad atmosphere by any stretch. It was and it felt admittedly a little quiet and smaller. Like, I mean, Anime North is the comparable I'll always use, but I never felt I wasted any time. Every evening I was able to come down. That all said, well, I did pay the very super early bird, and by the time the show rolled around, I know that the price of that 3-day pass was more than twice as much of what I paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of what we had originally paid, and
Yeah,
obviously that makes us feel like we got our money's worth. But yeah, sometimes there were obviously lines if you want to get certain autographs, or sometimes get into certain main events. Like as I said, Kevin, the VTuber event seemed like it had its line start early on the Sunday, and they used both rooms, the main and the overflow room, for those VTubers. So that was a
People
big
were
draw
lining
too.
up. People were lining up since a little bit before 10 o'clock because my friend joined the line shortly afterwards after I helped him offload a spare badge because he bought 2 by accident. Well, more like he forgot his rolled over. And then, so I was in line for a good 30 minutes with him, talking to other VTuber fans while I was waiting for a guy to buy my pair of Vans shoes. And then, yeah, oh man, the enthusiasm of these fans can, it's sometimes it's a little unnerving, but at the same time, it's also very admirable.
Okay.
I say that just because uh the type of fanaticism that can breed from these types of performers, like I feel like it's a very fine line. And I feel like the people in line with my friend and I were quite civil for the most part. A couple of weirdos in line too that
Well,
got a
we
little
saw one on Saturday, remember, where it was a fellow asking if a VTuber event was happening. It's like, no, they're in line for Yukana and stuff like that. Or was it
yeah.
no, maybe it was, yeah, no, it was definitely that one. It wasn't when I was there for the Daigo premiere, but he had come, and it was just by definitely fanatical in one sense. But the other thing I remember was just his hat. It was just a simple black hat, but on the front of it had all in small letters hentai. And that just kind of, I don't know why that stuck out, but it just did. And I said, that's a fan base.
I'm thankful I didn't see anyone with an Agehao shirt.
Okay.
But yeah, there was one guy in line that was kind of weird towards my friend because apparently he recognized him from Anime North,
Oh boy.
but which is interesting. But I only caught the overflow. Like I caught some of the concert at the end of the panel, which was nice. But I kind of wished I was in the main room though, just because I can see the people
Getting
react,
into it.
and like of
Yeah.
course the atmosphere would be a lot different from the overflow room because the overflow room is mostly people just quietly watching or just relaxing while like trying to figure out what else to do with their day. Let's
Main
see.
room is just the ones who want to be there.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
Truly want to be
Because
there.
they lined up 3 hours in advance. And
Good for
I
them.
without a doubt there were people that came just for Sunday for the Hololive event. Because Kiara Takanashi is very popular. She is one of the more popular Hololive VTubers. Reine, I think, is newer, if I'm not mistaken. But Friday basically was very quick. And then I know you and I met up briefly towards the end, Mike. Saturday, let's see. I got there pretty early because my friend likes to be at these things very early.
Right.
Well, I went to most of the panels that had Japanese guests. Yukana's was nice in that it did go over time.
Well,
A
you
half
did go
hour.
through. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was interesting to see how much depth she gave to her answers, even for obscure characters from like MOBA games or mobile games. Sometimes it made me wonder, like, do you really remember these minor characters that you're playing, and that you're just very good at making stuff up on the spot? Like, if
Well,
regardless,
remember
that's
she
very
said she cares
impressive.
about all her characters, right? She can't choose one. She told that to a few people.
Like, it's easy if you mention Mei Ling or Tessa or C2 or any or the character she voiced for the Tales games, for example. But
Yeah, there were some people that dug deep, I remember, that's for sure.
wow, I'm just like, oh, like wow.
No, sometimes that happens a lot. Okay.
Don't worry. By the time we got to see Daigo and we got to the Q&A there, Kevin's been pegged as the only firefighter Daigo fan in Canada, I think. He's been marked.
Yeah,
Okay.
I own the whole thing. So for those who don't know, this new anime is a spin-off series of the original Firefighter Daigo manga by Masahito Soda. And the first series got an OVA or like a short movie like way back, but this is the first time Daigo in of any kind has gotten a TV series. So seeing it, seeing it in nice definition and seeing like the situation they were in, yeah, it kind of did bring a tear to my eye. Like, no joke, I was just like, wow, like we're finally getting Daigo of some kind. And this probably will
Yeah,
be the
no,
only way I experience the new Daigo, because no way that manga is getting licensed.
But
Because the first Daigo series did horribly for Viz, and I think the new one is by Kodansha. But yeah, I don't see them putting that out physically. That'd be insanity, unless this show somehow blows up. But yeah, it was really cool to see that. See episode 1. I might actually give a real effort to try and watch this as it airs.
okay.
Okay, and then Sunday
And then
was like, yeah, just it's basically more of the same. But I did find the response that Can gave.
let's hear this before we end the talk, and then try and finish up the episode.
I finally finished reading through all the feedback. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. You, who was another staffer on the Discord server, does not solely represent our entire organization. He tirelessly volunteers his time to help our communications, but I can see how that would create the impression that he's speaking on behalf of all of us. For those who do not know, I am the founder of both Anime Revo and Anime Toronto. It frustrates me to have disappointed so many of you, but I want to let you know that your feedback is extremely valuable to me. I have already documented every concern that has been brought up and will take steps to implement solutions for all of them. It's unrealistic for me to say that I can fix everything, but I want to at least let you know that we care and take the feedback very seriously. Side note, we tried moving, with permission, all artists from the back row because we heard so many of them have a hard time in their location. That was a big issue that I didn't bring up, actually, that some people were actually moving around to different tables, apparently. Side note 2, a coalition of artists formed that wanted to be moved, bracket, they were to be annexed by themselves after we removed empty tables, close bracket. So we did that as well to help with the concerns around our polar stage. I think that was the open performance stage on the right side.
Yeah, that was at the front, on the right side.
This isn't to pat myself on the back, just to explain that we didn't just move people without their permission, and that we really want you all to have a great time at the event. There was one booth we slid one booth over that I couldn't contact. The booth had empty booths on either side of them, so I didn't think it was too much trouble to move them. With that said, I'm sorry, we should have notified ahead of time. On behalf of the team, we sincerely apologize for so many of the problems you experienced this year. Today, our final set of guests left the city. Oh, and I can focus my attention better on how we can improve and send out that feedback form we've been promising, which they did have since put out. Thank you for coming this year and giving us a chance, and we'll work hard to rebuild the trust we lost this year. P.S. Feedback form coming later tonight or early tomorrow. I'm getting kicked out of the cafe I'm in. Who closed the cafe at 5 p.m.?
Let me just quickly say, I always thought that this year's Anime Toronto was a no-win situation anyway, a real Kobayashi Maru. Labor Day, week after FanExpo, this type of stuff after 4 years since the original. So it was always playing behind the 8 ball. So,
and I feel the other thing that you think about too is they came back a few months earlier, obviously said that, but basically they were planning 2 cons. They had Anime Revolution, their main con that they had already brought back the year before. They had that 2 weeks before. Then they had to do Anime Toronto 2 weeks later and stuff like that. And obviously they planned it because I guess they felt it would work better, but that can have complications, if you know what I mean, I feel.
mm-hmm.
Especially if they're going cross country from Vancouver to Toronto and stuff like that.
That's probably the case, to be honest. I need to actually get in touch with a friend of mine who is con ops, actually.
Anyway, there's some thoughts on Anime Toronto this year.
Oh, one more thing, actually. I noticed that not a lot of the retailers were ones that I recognized. So a lot of the usual players were not at this con.
Okay.
With the
only one me and you would recognize is probably Labyrinth, but other than that, it was.
And Omomo was there too, actually.
Oh yeah, Navita World was there too as well.
Ah, yes, Navita was there, and Omomo was there.
Yeah, but they had some Funko Pop people, they had some clothing people, they had some. It was a different mix. That's all we could say.
Yeah, there are a couple of clothing retailers that do have like officially licensed clothing. That was nice. I'd heard of some of these, and the stuff's okay. Depends on what it is. Doesn't appeal to me that much, but then I'm approaching jaded older fan territory, so I'm a little more critical.
It's great. It's great territory. I must tell you that.
Well, I hate to tell you, the one event that we're probably going to talk about on the calendar is perfect for the older jaded fan and stuff like that, isn't it?
Yeah,
a week and a bit. On the 22nd and the 23rd.
Yeah, let's talk about let's go there before we go tonight, and then let's save the One Piece live action discussion for when Mo's around, because he's seen the most of it out of any of us.
I think he's seen all of it
to this point. Yeah, well, probably the whole first season. Just in terms of Anime Toronto, just want to quickly say, Ken, I respect him for at least saying something. So wait and see again.
I feel like with this con, there was gonna be some growing pains, and also it's their first year back since COVID-19.
In many respects,
happened.
It's a real reset for them. Mm-hmm. So
just like how that was the case for Anime North as well.
Well, yeah, and they had some hiccups for their reset last year, but obviously they had their almost 20. Well, they had their 20 plus years of history behind them, too. And that's something that, to be fair to Anime Toronto, doesn't have.
I think we could say, okay, would be perfect. July would be perfect.
So we'll see what happens. And, stay tuned. Okay. Before we go tonight, let's put out the big event in the anime community calendar. Yes, we just James just hinted at it. The creator of Planetes and Vinland Saga, Yukimora Makoto, will be appearing on the weekend of the 22nd and 23rd of September at 2 different events. The first one at the Japan Foundation Toronto, and the other one on the Saturday, the 23rd, the Toronto International Festival of Authors. As of this taping, the Japan Foundation event on the Friday is down to a rush line. All the reservations have already been taken, but there's still as we mentioned, a standby line, and the event the next day at TIFF. James, Kevin, I know this is probably more on your radar than it would be on mine, even though I have a ticket to this. I know you two got yours. What do you want to say?
Oh,
Yeah, we did.
Interesting. Like I gotta say that Toronto International Festival of Authors obviously has been going on for a number of years. So it's interesting that they've decided to expand in different directions and bring over someone from East Asia and then from Japan and stuff like that, and a manga author, right? Instead of maybe a regular author and stuff like that in their wheelhouse. But definitely Makoto Yukimura, his two works are interesting and touch a lot of different things and places with Vinland Saga and the Viking Age and stuff like that, and with Planetes and looking at the future in space realistically and stuff like that, so to speak. You know what I mean? So it'll be interesting to see how the two panels, what they discuss. I think it's going to be more on the Vinland Saga side, and it'll be interesting because this is probably, I think, his second time in North America. The first being 2 months ago in San Diego Comic-Con, because that was supposedly his first appearance in North America, I think.
That's correct.
So
yeah.
So I'm wondering if maybe because he's in his final arc and stuff like that, Vinland Saga, and I won't say anything because, well, I guess I can't really. You can spoil it if you want, but basically they're in Vinland Saga, which we know as in Canada and stuff like that, East Coast Canada. I won't say where in East Coast Canada, but yes, I wonder if maybe he went there to do some research and stuff like that, because I know he probably does a lot of research, because it's incredible the breadth in his stories for both Planetes and Vinland Saga. So we'll probably get a lot out of both panels, even if we're not able to get to the signings and stuff like that, because I know he has 2 signings on the Friday and the Saturday as well. But we'll see how that all pans out, because the Friday one's a lottery and the Saturday one, we're just gonna have to wait and see.
Kevin?
Yeah, I feel somewhat vindicated that I didn't go to SDCC now that he's coming here. I'm more of a Planetes fan. I haven't read much of Vinland Saga, to be honest. But yeah, I'm excited to see them all the same. And you can usually count on the Japan Foundation to kind of be involved with this kind of stuff nowadays. And I believe I wouldn't be surprised if TCAF had some influence in this as well.
I believe for the International Festival of Authors, that one, the person monitoring that one is actually the head of TCAF now, supposedly.
Yeah. Is it Miles?
Yeah, I believe it's Miles that is moderating it with Makoto Yukimura and stuff like that. And then, as we know, I forget who it is, but it's another fella that's moderating the Friday one at Japan Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The only thing that else I take away is I know how much you've raved about both titles. I'm not quite as familiar with either of them.
It took a long time to even keep them in print and stuff like that, because even Vinland Saga, they kept on begging us and saying, well, if you don't pre-order, then guess what? It's not going to continue.
They didn't beg
so
us.
It's like, how did we get here is the question in my mind still.
James, Ben Applegate didn't beg us. He threatened us to buy it. He only, because Kodansha at the time had only committed to the first 3 or 4 omnibus volumes back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Which meant volume 8 of the Japanese release. And he explicitly said, if you guys don't buy this, we're not putting out any more.
Yeah.
And then they did well enough that the next omnibus got announced. And again, Ben Applegate said, if this doesn't do well enough, this is all you're getting.
And it just kept going.
And eventually it still did fine enough that he would still then put them out, or they still put them out. And then the anime got licensed and got a release, so it was fine. It didn't matter anymore.
I guess it was a slow burn on the anime, because the first season was on Amazon Prime and stuff like that with Anime Strike, but then that went under. And then when it finally, I guess, whatever license lapsed, it went to Netflix, it went to Sentai, it went to Crunchyroll, and I think that really helped to get it out to the wider audience, because in the thing for the International Authors Festival, they mentioned it being on Netflix for Vinland Saga and stuff like that. So obviously playing to the larger audience that goes to that festival and stuff like that on the waterfront, because that one's at the Harbourfront Center in Toronto.
Well, if nothing else for me, maybe I'm curious to now take a watch. Anyway.
So are you coming with us, Mike? To the Friday one?
Yeah, I'll probably be there. I mean, I did get a ticket.
As I told Mike, remember to be there early, probably at the 5:30, because if it's already full, I bet you people are going to want to get there so they can get their seats.
I'd say maybe 5, actually.
I'll try to keep it.
I guess we're going all for 5 then, because I was going to be early, but 5 sounds fine to me.
We'll talk about it then. Anyway,
actually, thinking we had mentioned Random House and stuff like that, and it was a final thought that came to my mind, and I see it now. Did you guys mention it? It's more for Kevin too. I was surprised Penguin Random House is coming back into manga and to pop culture comics. You heard about end of January where it was Inklore, and one of their launch titles in early 24 for this Inklore imprint for Penguin Random House is it was the 99 Yamada 99. There it is. My Love Story with Yamada-kun at level 99. That's the one they're launching, which is interesting and stuff like that. So it looks like Del Rey wasn't their last crack at the can, so to speak. So it'll be interesting to see what Inklore does in the future with non-East Asian comics, but they seem to be getting into that side too, and they're launching with that title, which supposedly I guess has been doing big, because I know Aniplex is doing a dub for it now on Crunchyroll.
Okay.
And that one I think Mangamo was putting out digitally, so that's, I guess, a nice in for them to help get things out physically.
One way to put it. So, but yeah.
But did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Kevin,
because I thought that was interesting that they're back in the game with that, with Inklore for Penguin Random House.
Well, yeah, that was a pretty intriguing announcement. It's not a bad first title to pick off, or not a bad first title to start with.
Well, then okay.
But we'll wait for 2024 to see how it goes along. But you never know; it might be like Square Enix manga, and they might go small. But
they're not the only one that are like trying to expand a little bit, because there's that one other publisher that they actually what did they do? They're bringing back the Speed Grapher manga of all things.
Oh, that was Titan Comics.
Yeah, it was Titan Comics,
and so they have Titan manga and stuff like that. But there have been questions of quality on that one. I know for translation. So any of the titles like the Speed Grapher one, where they had previous Tokyo Pop translations or previous translations, they would use those. But then any new stuff, there have been question marks on the translations they've used, because there's questions whether they've used machine translation or not, I know.
Oh boy.
We'll see what happens, because they have some new ones too, but we'll see what happens in the coming year, because I probably would check before I buy on those ones, I know.
They're bringing back the Burst Angel manga too.
Yep. Yeah, they were all licensed ones that had anime before they had a manga version, I know.
Yeah. Well, as I said, the list, this could get interesting. Let's just say that much. Okay. I guess we've been on long enough. Somehow 3 of us still stretched this out for almost 2 hours. But it's nice to get back in the saddle to do a regular episode again. Thanks, James. Nice to have you back around the table again.
No problem, and I'm sure next time, once we get Mo, I guess we'll be talking about One Piece, because I know it's become a cultural phenomena in the live action sense. I know, since we talked briefly on that at the beginning,
and of course
and so forth.
We'll talk about, and of course, hopefully we'll be able to talk with Amy as well. Okay, there was one other thing, and this is a semi-serious note. I know one other thing that also caught our attention this week was the latest in the Johnny Network scandal. Kevin and I know, wanted to talk about this more at length at some point, but can you give me a little bit of patience? I did finally find the BBC documentary on that. I do want to watch that and then digest that, because that story I know you've kept up with more than I have, but it's just it's taken a lot of fascination about. I've taken a little bit more attention with it over the in light of the latest developments, and maybe some of the commentaries that recent commentaries by people like Roland Keltz on it too. So I want to watch that, and let's Space Heater chat that maybe before the next regular episode. Okay,
sure.
And James, if you're I know you'd have an opinion if you got the time to watch, so you're invited. Of course, everyone's invited, right? So maybe something else to look forward to in the next little bit. But yeah, well, then we'll talk a little bit more, maybe a little bit more on the other stuff later on. Maybe a few more Anime Toronto notes for sure. When Mo comes back around the table, as James mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit of live One Piece live action. Kevin and I have at least seen the first episode. Pretty sure Mo has seen more than the first episode, and we got to talk about that, especially. Some of the comparisons are going to be, and the things we'll talk about are kind of inevitable, and we want to talk about that. But I think we've said enough for tonight. So let's put out the contacts one more time. animeroundtable@gmail.com, at animeroundtable, animeroundtable.com, twitch.tv/animeroundtable. Yeah, we should mention it. And of course, the YouTube channel. But once again, first and foremost, we're just a podcast. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and the like. Oh, wait, did Stitcher go under? Yeah, it did. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Because good reviews will always help. What type of reviews, Kevin?
Any reviews.
Yeah, because it's better than none. And of course, we're halfway to our quota, and we're not halfway through the month of September yet. So hopefully we'll get something out before the end of the month. And maybe we'll try and do things weekly or bi-weekly again. But in any event, give us a subscribe, like, or follow on any of the platforms we're on, so you can be notified when we put on something new. Also, once again, if you have a Spotify account, please check out the Anime Roundtable playlist for a list of music based on the things we've mentioned here on this show today or in the past. The theme song is entitled Fubuki Snowstorm by Piko Misaki. You can check out more of her music at picoinfinity.com or on Facebook at picozenmusic. You could have listened to any anime podcast in the world, but you decided to listen to this one, and we all appreciate it. So thanks for listening. Good night from Toronto, and join us again for another edition of the Anime Roundtable.